My name is Dr. Michael Harrison. I'm 52 years old, and I've spent the last 25 years as a fertility specialist in Portland, Oregon. I've helped thousands of couples conceive, delivered more babies than I can count, and I understand the science of reproduction better than most. So, when my sister-in-law Jessica slipped me that folded lab report during what should have been one of the happiest days of my marriage, I knew exactly what I was looking at. DNA paternity test, probability of paternity 0.0%. The baby my wife Sarah was carrying, the child we'd been planning and preparing for over the past 7 months, wasn't mine. Sarah caught my eye from across the room as Jessica quickly moved away, her face instantly shifting from joy to barely controlled panic. "What did she give you?" she asked, her voice pitched just a little too high to be casual. I folded the paper calmly and slipped it into my jacket pocket. 25 years of delivering difficult medical news had taught me the value of composure under pressure. "Just congratulations, Osson," I said with a smile. She wanted to give me a personal note about how happy she is for us. Sarah's shoulders relaxed, but I caught the flash of something in her eyes. Relief mixed with calculation. In that moment, I realized this wasn't just infidelity. This was something much more orchestrated. I excused myself to the bathroom and read the report again. The lab was reputable, the chain of custody documented. Jessica had somehow obtained Sarah's DNA, probably from a hairbrush or drinking glass, along with mine from God knows where, and compared them to fetal DNA obtained during routine prenatal screening. The science was solid. The conclusion was inescapable. But here's what Sarah didn't understand about being married to a fertility specialist. I don't just understand conception, I understand deception. I've seen every type of paternity fraud imaginable in my practice. I know how these schemes work, how they fall apart, and most importantly, how to document everything properly for legal proceedings. Standing in that bathroom, surrounded by the sounds of our baby shower celebration, I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront Sarah immediately. I wasn't going to create a scene that would humiliate both our families. Instead, I was going to do what I do best: gather data, analyze the evidence, and plan my response with surgical precision. I had 9 months to get this right. Later that evening, after our guests had left and Sarah had fallen asleep exhausted from the excitement, I called Jessica. She answered on the first ring, as if she'd been waiting. "You read it," she said without preamble. I did. "How long have you suspected?" Jessica was quiet for a moment. 2 months ago, I was at lunch with Sarah and her friend Monica. They were talking about financial planning, and Sarah said something that stuck with me. She said she was looking forward to securing her financial future and mentioned something about how some men don't realize what they're really signing up for when they get married. "That could mean anything," I said, though my stomach was already sinking. "Then, last month I saw her coming out of a hotel downtown with a man I didn't recognize. When I asked her about it later, she claimed she'd been at a doctor's appointment, but Michael, the appointment she described to me was scheduled for the same time I saw her at that hotel." I closed my eyes. "So you decided to test?" "I work in medical billing, Michael. I know how to order lab work discreetly. I got Sarah's DNA from her coffee cup when she visited last week, and I took your toothbrush when I used your bathroom during the shower. I'm sorry for the invasion of privacy, but I couldn't watch you walk into this blind." Jessica had done me an enormous favor, though I suspect she had no idea how enormous. She'd given me something infinitely more valuable than just knowledge of Sarah's infidelity. She'd given me time to prepare. The first step was understanding the timeline. Sarah and I had been trying to conceive for over a year before she got pregnant. We'd done fertility testing. Ironically, my own clinic had confirmed my sperm count, and motility were excellent for a man my age. The conception had been a cause for celebration, particularly since we'd both thought it might require intervention. Now I understood why it had been so easy. I started documenting everything. My medical training had taught me that memory is unreliable, but data is forever. I began keeping a journal, noting Sarah's behavior patterns, her schedule changes, her phone habits. I invested in a discreet voice recording app for my phone and started documenting our conversations, particularly any discussions about the pregnancy, finances, or future planning. The pattern that emerged was disturbing. Sarah had started working with a personal trainer, Marcus Thompson, about 18 months earlier. She'd claimed it was to get in shape before trying to conceive, a reasonable explanation that I'd supported both emotionally and financially. Marcus was 28, athletic, charming, and according to Sarah, incredibly motivating. Her training sessions were scheduled 3 times a week, but I noticed she often came home later than a standard hour-long session would require. When I asked about it, she always had ready explanations: nutrition counseling, program planning, equipment orientation, all plausible for someone serious about fitness. But here's what bothered my analytical mind. Sarah's fitness results were inconsistent with the time investment she claimed to be making. After 18 months of supposedly intensive training, her physique hadn't changed significantly. Either Marcus was an incompetent trainer, or the sessions weren't primarily focused on exercise. I started paying attention to our joint credit card statements. The gym membership was legitimate, but there were other charges that formed a suspicious pattern: hotel visits on the same days as training sessions, expensive restaurants in the middle of weekday afternoons, purchases from lingerie stores that corresponded with her workout schedule. Sarah was smart enough not to use our joint accounts for everything, but she wasn't smart enough to completely hide her digital footprint. She'd linked her fitness tracking app to our shared Apple account, and I could see location data that showed her phone spending hours at addresses that weren't the gym. One address appeared repeatedly: a downtown apartment complex called Harborview Towers. A property record search revealed that Marcus Thompson leased Unit 2314. Sarah's phone data showed she'd spent significant time at that exact location on her supposed training days, often for 3 to 4 hours at a stretch. By month 4 of the pregnancy, I had enough circumstantial evidence to confirm the affair, but I needed to understand the scope of what I was dealing with. This wasn't just a wife cheating with her trainer. There were financial implications I needed to explore. Sarah knew my net worth. She knew about my retirement accounts, my investment portfolio, and my ownership stake in the fertility clinic. She also knew that Oregon was a community property state and that a divorce with a child would entitle her to significant alimony and child support payments. More concerning, she'd recently started asking detailed questions about my life insurance policies and my will. She'd framed these conversations around responsible planning for our growing family, but now I recognize them as intelligence gathering. This wasn't just an affair. This was a financial scheme. I hired a private investigator, discreetly, through an attorney friend who specialized in divorce cases. What we uncovered was worse than I'd imagined. Marcus Thompson had a history. Over the past 5 years, he'd been involved with 3 other married women, all of whom had gotten pregnant during their relationships with him. All 3 had divorced their husbands and pursued aggressive child support claims. In 2 cases, the husbands had settled out of court rather than face public paternity disputes. In the 3rd case, a businessman in Seattle, the man had actually accepted Marcus's child and continued paying support even after discovering the affair. Marcus had refined this into a business model. He targeted married women whose husbands were high earners, particularly older men in second marriages who were eager to prove their continued virility. He'd work on them psychologically, convincing them they deserved better, that their husbands didn't appreciate them, that they had a right to financial security. The scheme was elegant in its simplicity. Even if the husband discovered the affair, social pressure and family expectations often led them to accept the child rather than create a public scandal. And if they did pursue divorce, Marcus would coach the women on maximizing their settlements while positioning himself to benefit from the resulting financial windfall. But here's where Marcus had made a critical miscalculation. He'd assumed that because I was a soft-spoken doctor, more comfortable with medical journals than confrontation, I wouldn't have the skills or the resolve to fight back effectively. He was about to learn why medical training includes both diagnosis and treatment. Through my investigator, I learned that Marcus and Sarah had been discussing their future together. Phone records showed extensive communication between them, particularly during my work hours when they knew I wouldn't be monitoring her activity. The conversations weren't just romantic, they were strategic. They were planning for life after my divorce from Sarah. Marcus had already started looking at larger apartments, ones that could accommodate Sarah and their child. Sarah had been researching divorce attorneys, specifically ones who specialized in high-asset cases involving medical professionals. They'd even discussed timing. The plan was to wait until after the birth, establish me as the legal father on the birth certificate, then initiate divorce proceedings 6 months later. This would maximize Sarah's claim to alimony and child support while giving Marcus time to establish himself as the child's real father figure. The financial projections were staggering. Based on my income and Oregon support guidelines, Sarah would be entitled to approximately $12,000 per month in combined alimony and child support. Over 18 years, that represented more than $2.5 million, not including her share of our marital assets in the divorce settlement. Marcus wasn't just stealing my wife, he was stealing my financial future. But they'd made one fundamental error in their planning. They'd assumed I would react emotionally, that I'd either accept the situation to avoid embarrassment or fight it clumsily through anger and accusation. They hadn't considered that I might approach their deception the same way I approached medical cases, systematically, thoroughly, and with complete documentation of every relevant fact. I spent month 6 establishing baseline financial protections. I consulted with an attorney about asset protection strategies and quietly restructured some of my investments into separate property categories. I documented every expenditure Sarah made that could be traced to her affair, building a case for financial misconduct that would impact any divorce settlement. I also did something that Marcus and Sarah couldn't have anticipated. I started gathering intelligence on their future plans. My investigator discovered that Marcus had applied for a business loan to expand his personal training operation. The loan application listed Sarah as a co-applicant and referenced her expected settlement income as collateral for the debt. They weren't just planning to live off my support payments, they were planning to leverage them for business expansion. The arrogance was breathtaking. They were so confident in their scheme that they'd already started spending money they expected to steal from me. By month 7, I had everything I needed: documented proof of the affair, evidence of their financial planning, and most importantly, the original paternity test that would invalidate any claim Sarah might make to child support. But I wasn't ready to play my hand yet. I wanted them to commit fully to their deception, to put themselves in a position where they couldn't retreat or claim misunderstanding. I wanted them to hang themselves with their own rope. The last 2 months of Sarah's pregnancy were a masterclass in performance art. I played the role of excited, expectant father while systematically documenting every element of their scheme. Sarah, emboldened by what she perceived as my complete ignorance, became increasingly careless. She started having longer phone conversations with Marcus even when I was home, though she'd claimed they were discussing birth preparation or postpartum fitness planning. She also became more aggressive about financial planning. She insisted we meet with an estate planning attorney to update our wills for the baby's protection. During that meeting, she pushed hard for arrangements that would maximize her financial benefits if something happened to me. Most telling, she started researching divorce attorneys. She thought she was being discreet, but she'd forgotten that our home computer backed up all browser history to our shared cloud account. I could see every search, every attorney website she visited, every article she read about maximizing divorce settlements in high-asset cases. She was preparing for war, but she thought I was completely unaware of the approaching battle. Marcus, meanwhile, had started positioning himself more prominently in our social circle. He'd appear at the gym when he knew I'd be there, offering friendly advice about supporting Sarah through her pregnancy. He'd send text messages to Sarah during family dinners, which she'd claim were schedule adjustments or nutrition reminders. He was establishing himself as a presence in our lives, laying groundwork for his eventual emergence as Sarah's supportive partner during our divorce proceedings. What neither of them realized was that every interaction was being documented. Every text message, every phone call, every financial transaction was building toward their eventual exposure. The delivery was scheduled for March 15th at Portland General Hospital. Sarah had specifically requested that I be present for the birth, insisting that this was a moment we needed to share together as a family. She'd been particularly focused on making sure I understood the importance of immediately signing the birth certificate, claiming she'd read that delays could complicate the baby's legal status. I knew better. In Oregon, signing a birth certificate as the father creates a legal presumption of paternity that can be expensive and time-consuming to challenge later. Sarah wanted my signature on that document before I had any opportunity to request genetic testing. 3 days before the due date, Marcus had booked a hotel room at the Marriott downtown, walking distance from the hospital. When I asked Sarah about his plans, she claimed he'd offered to be on call in case she needed anything during labor that I couldn't provide. Just a good friend looking out for her well-being. I knew exactly what he'd really be doing, waiting for the birth, ready to begin the next phase of their plan. On March 14th, Sarah went into labor at 2:30 a.m. I drove her to the hospital, playing my role perfectly. The nervous, excited husband supporting his wife through the most important moment of their marriage. Marcus arrived at the hospital an hour later. He stayed in the waiting area, ostensibly there to offer moral support to both of us. But I could see him checking his phone constantly, monitoring Sarah's progress through text messages. He was waiting for his payday. Sarah was in labor for 12 hours. During that time, I had plenty of opportunity to observe Marcus's behavior. He was nervous, excited, constantly pacing the waiting room. This wasn't the casual concern of a family friend. This was a man waiting for the birth of what he believed to be his child. At 2:47 p.m., Dr. Rodriguez announced that Sarah was ready to push. The delivery room filled with the usual controlled chaos of childbirth. Nurses monitoring vital signs, equipment humming, Sarah focused entirely on the physical demands of labor. I stood beside her, holding her hand, offering encouragement, playing the role of a supportive husband. But my mind was entirely focused on what would happen after the delivery. The baby was born at 3:47 p.m. The delivery was smooth, professional, exactly what you'd expect from Portland General's obstetrics unit. When Dr. Rodriguez announced, "It's a healthy baby boy," the room erupted in the usual celebration of successful childbirth. Then she handed me the birth certificate to sign. "Actually," I said calmly, "I think we should wait on that paperwork." The room went quiet. Sarah, exhausted from labor but suddenly alert, stared at me with growing alarm. "Michael, what are you talking about? We discussed this. You need to sign so we can take him home." "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding," I replied, my voice steady and professional. "I won't be signing any documentation claiming to be this child's father." Dr. Rodriguez looked confused. The nurses exchanged glances. Sarah's face went from confusion to panic in the space of about 5 seconds. "Michael, you're not thinking clearly," she said, her voice rising. "The stress of becoming a father, it's affecting your judgment. Of course you're the father. We've been trying for months." I pulled out the folder I'd brought to the hospital and opened it calmly. 9 months ago, I received some disturbing information about this pregnancy. Rather than create a scene at the time, I decided to investigate thoroughly and gather all the relevant facts. I handed Sarah the original paternity test that Jessica had provided. This is a DNA analysis proving that I'm not the biological father of the child you're carrying. I've spent the past 9 months documenting the affair you've been having with your personal trainer, Marcus Thompson, including financial records showing hotel visits, phone data proving extended visits to his apartment, and surveillance evidence of your relationship. The silence in the room was deafening. Sarah stared at the paternity test like it was written in a foreign language. "That's impossible," she whispered. "Michael, you're not thinking clearly. This has to be some kind of mistake." "Sarah," I said quietly, "I've been a fertility specialist for 25 years. I understand genetics, I understand paternity testing, and I understand fraud. I also understand that Marcus has done this before with other wives, other families. You're not his first victim." I turned to Dr. Rodriguez. "I'm sorry you have to witness this, but I wanted medical professionals present when I made it clear that I take no legal or financial responsibility for this child." That's when the baby cried for the first time since the delivery, and everyone in the room turned to look at him. The child was unmistakably black. The silence that followed was unlike anything I'd experienced in a medical setting. Dr. Rodriguez, who had delivered thousands of babies, stood frozen holding the infant. The nurses stared in shock. And Sarah looked like someone had just explained quantum physics to her in a foreign language. "That's not," she started, then stopped. "There must be some mistake." But we all knew there was no mistake. The baby's features were clearly African American, beautiful, healthy, but obviously not genetically related to either Sarah, who was Irish American, or Marcus, who was Greek and Italian. From the hallway came the sound of rapidly retreating footsteps. Through the window in the delivery room door, I could see Marcus Thompson disappearing around the corner at something approaching a run. He'd been watching through the window, waiting for the moment when I'd sign the birth certificate and officially become responsible for his child. Instead, he'd witnessed the complete collapse of his carefully planned scheme. The baby wasn't his either. I closed the folder and looked at Sarah, who was staring at the infant with an expression of complete bewilderment. "Sarah," I said gently, "it appears your financial planning wasn't as thorough as you thought." The next hour was a blur of difficult conversations and harsh realizations. Dr. Rodriguez, demonstrating the professionalism I'd always admired in her, arranged for privacy while we sorted through the immediate implications of what had just occurred. Sarah, once she recovered from the initial shock, alternated between denial, anger, and eventually a kind of broken honesty. Yes, she'd been seeing Marcus. Yes, she'd known the baby might not be mine. But she swore she had no idea who the actual father was. "It was just one night," she kept repeating. "I went out with friends after a fight we had about money. I met someone at a bar. I was drunk, angry. It didn't mean anything." The timeline she described aligned with my documentation. About 9 months earlier, we'd had a significant argument about Sarah's spending habits. She'd stormed out of the house claiming she needed space to think. According to her fitness tracker data, she'd spent that evening at a downtown bar called Meridian, not at Marcus's apartment as she usually did. She'd had a one-night stand with a stranger, gotten pregnant, and then let Marcus believe the child was his while planning to pass it off as mine for financial gain. The scheme had layers of deception that even Marcus hadn't fully understood. 3 hours after the birth, hospital security informed me that Marcus Thompson had checked out of his hotel and left Portland. My investigator later confirmed that he'd driven straight to Seattle, where he was apparently reviving his previous identity and looking for new targets. Marcus had spent months planning to cash in on what he thought was his genetic investment in Sarah's marriage to me. When he realized the child wasn't his romantic interest in Sarah disappeared as quickly as his financial interest in her future. He'd abandoned her at exactly the moment she needed support most. Sarah was left in a hospital room with a newborn child, no husband, no boyfriend, and no financial plan. The man she'd betrayed her marriage for had disappeared the moment his scheme collapsed. The husband she'd planned to divorce was standing beside her bed with documentation that would prevent her from claiming any of his assets. She was alone in a way that I suspect she'd never imagined possible. The baby, meanwhile, was healthy and beautiful and completely innocent of the chaos surrounding his birth. Sarah named him David, and within a week had made arrangements for him to be placed with a loving adoptive family through Catholic charities. It was probably the first completely selfless decision she'd made in months. I filed for divorce the following week. My attorney was able to use the documented evidence of adultery, financial misconduct, and attempted paternity fraud to protect my assets completely. Sarah received no alimony, no child support, and no claim on my medical practice or retirement accounts. The divorce was finalized 4 months later, with Sarah signing away any claim to our marital property in exchange for my agreement not to pursue criminal charges for the attempted fraud. 6 months after the divorce, I received a letter from Jessica apologizing again for the invasion of privacy, but expressing relief that she'd acted when she did. She also mentioned that Sarah had moved back in with her parents in Sacramento and was working as a receptionist at a dental office, apparently learning to support herself for the first time in her adult life. I kept the letter for my files, not out of vindictiveness, but because my medical training had taught me to document outcomes. Every case teaches you something, even the personal ones. I'm 53 now, and I've returned to focusing entirely on my medical practice. I help couples conceive children they actually want, with partners they actually trust. It's good work, honest work, and it reminds me daily that while some people use reproduction for manipulation, most people just want to build authentic families based on love and commitment. The experience taught me several important lessons about the intersection of professional competence and personal protection. First, that expertise in one area often translates to other areas in unexpected ways. My understanding of genetics and reproductive medicine gave me tools to investigate Sarah's deception that she never anticipated I possessed. Second, that documentation and patience are more powerful than emotional confrontation. By taking 9 months to build an unshakable case rather than reacting immediately to Jessica's revelation, I was able to protect myself completely from what could have been a financially devastating fraud. Third, that some people view relationships as business transactions rather than emotional bonds. Sarah didn't betray our marriage because she fell in love with someone else. She betrayed it because she saw an opportunity to improve her financial position. Understanding that motivation helped me respond strategically rather than emotionally. Marcus Thompson taught me that there are professional predators who make their living exploiting trust and manipulating systems. Sarah taught me that even people you love can be willing participants in such exploitation. But mostly, they both taught me that professional competence and methodical preparation can protect you from even the most sophisticated personal betrayals. I've since implemented better asset protection strategies and more careful vetting of personal relationships. I've also started sharing my experience with other medical professionals who might be vulnerable to similar schemes. The medical community takes care of its own, and predators like Marcus often target us specifically because they assume we're too focused on our work to notice personal deception. In medicine, we have a saying, trust but verify. I thought I was applying that principle to my professional life, but I'd forgotten to apply it to my personal relationships. Now I know better. I still practice fertility medicine, still help couples build families, still believe in the fundamental goodness of people who want to create life together honestly. But I also know that some people see opportunity where others see love, and that professional skills can be just as valuable for personal protection as they are for career advancement. It's a harder wisdom than I wish I'd needed to learn, but it's wisdom nonetheless. And in the end, wisdom earned through difficulty tends to be the kind that lasts. The baby, David, was adopted by a wonderful family in Portland who specifically wanted to adopt a mixed-race child. I heard through the adoption agency that he's thriving, healthy, and loved. Sometimes that's the best possible outcome for everyone involved, even when it emerges from deception and betrayal. Life has a way of finding the right conclusions, even when the path there is more complicated than anyone planned.